South's Chief Political Reporter Henry Cook, and I'm joined today by the Leader of the Opposition, Judith Collins. Good morning.
Good morning, Henry.
You said yesterday that the government is giving up on the elimination strategy for COVID. Can you clarify about what you mean by that?
Yes, well, for instance, the government went to level 3 from level 4 in Auckland with new cases out in the community without any other particular explanation as to why they were doing that. But it is very clear as well the government has not released the medical advice on which they said they relied to make that decision. And certainly having heard Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, Director General of Health, on the issue, it seems as though only some of his advice was being taken. So it's pretty clear they're giving up on it because they know that there's another variant coming through, apparently the Mu variant. They're not in a position to be able to rule out further lockdowns, but they're also understanding, I believe, that they have no longer got a mandate to keep locking people down.
They say, and Ashley Bloomfield was just on RNZ saying this, that 0 cases might not be reached again, but they will still act with kind of extreme hostility to the virus. They'll still do a lot of extensive contact tracing to ring fence it whenever it pops up. But yes, realistically, there might not be a few, another week of 0 cases. So for that, is that for you giving up on elimination? Well,
it is really. I think the point too is that it's only now that the government is talking about doing better contact tracing. They clearly have not brought in rapid antigen testing, which would be so useful at the borders between, say, Auckland and Waikato. They could be using this tool that hasn't been brought into the country or even authorised by MedSafe. And then they have things like only recently brought in saliva testing. So they haven't taken some of the steps. And there's other things that they could be doing now, which is putting in orders for the new therapeutic drugs that are being developed right now to deal with COVID-19.
The only country that's really beaten Delta back is China. And a small village in Taiwan that was quite rural and kind of spread apart. It's become endemic in Victoria, New South Wales, and even probably ACT is probably the better comparator for us in that they've got it down to, single-digit or double-digit cases a day, but they just can't put it out. There's still just some spread between households, and they know that at the moment they lift restrictions, it'll probably go up again. Was losing it, was it inevitable that New Zealand was going to lose this fight?
Well, it's certainly becoming clear that that is the likelihood. So, for instance, when I've talked to virologists about this, they've said that COVID-19 will continue to mutate. It will continue likely to become more easily transmittable, absolutely endemic throughout the community, but that the seriousness of the effect on humans will become less. So apparently that's how viruses work. They become very much about not killing their host body, but about spreading. And so people will be able to get booster shots, hopefully next year if the government orders them, and that they will be able to keep up a degree of immunity. But the issue, I think, too, is that this virus, people are used to getting an immunisation and then pretty much not getting the winter flu, for instance. But this virus, the immunisation, as we know, doesn't actually stop people getting the virus. There's just a high likelihood they won't get it, and they certainly can transmit it, but they're less likely to end up in an intensive care unit or with serious effects.
If in 2 weeks cases have gone up a lot, we're seeing 50, 60 cases a day, should Auckland go back to level 4?
No, I don't think we can continue down this path. It is unsustainable economically. The short, sharp lockdown that Auckland was told they'd be having 5 weeks ago has now turned into the longest lockdown that we've seen. It is very severe, and the effects on the economy, but also on people's mental health, is very severe, and we really don't know the full effects of that yet. I asked the Prime Minister yesterday just essentially how many more of these level 4 lockdowns is she prepared to put the country through before she confirms that she's given up on the elimination strategy. And she didn't seem to have an answer to that. She actually, I thought, became very flustered on it. But it is important that we move past constantly locking down a third of the population and at the same time not having proper quarantine facilities, purpose-built, all these sorts of things. The government could have avoided this, but they didn't plan and they didn't execute.
So, I guess the first part of that, do you think she should be able to roll out? Should that be the last before ever? Should we, say goodbye to before?
Well, it's clear that the virus is mutating in a way where it becomes more easily transmittable, but fewer people get severely affected by it. So she should be able to move, or certainly have a plan to move out of that. And unless another variant comes along that completely goes against what the virologists say will happen. So it is important that the government has a plan and that they tell us what it is. They have not told us what it is, and I don't think they've got a plan.
For you, you'd like to see no more level 4 ever again, unless maybe there's a variant.
Yeah, well, you don't, unless it's needed. I certainly don't think that the first port of call should be, if you have a heavily vaccinated population, which we're starting to get some progress now, you have in place purpose-built quarantine facilities for people with COVID, so they're not out there spreading it. Then you have contact tracing. You have better things like rapid antigen testing, saliva testing. You take it seriously. But the key has to be that we can't just go rushing into level 4 lockdown every time there's 20 cases in the community.
You just said that this could have been avoided. But I guess if we look overseas, everyone else has had the Delta outbreak, basically. And once it's got endemic, it's been issues. So could this really have been avoided? Is it so transmissible that, if we're going to have something like MAQ, it was always going to...
Well, when you look overseas, there's not many countries that are as remote as we are. We are surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, and we are in the Tasman Sea. It's not as though we've got land
Australia.
borders. We don't have land borders, yes, but they're...
Australia were taking less people per capita than we are.
Yeah,
and they've had multiple outbreaks.
But they're extremely, much bigger country as well, and much higher population. But it is possible too, because we were fortunate enough to have a country that most people are very compliant as well with requests from the government and orders from the government. So we are different people, but also in New Zealand we were able to, Delta came in April, as I recall, in the MIQ facility. It was next seen in about July. The government could have prepared, they could have got a vaccination rate up. And as you're looking at Australia, Australia had a very low vaccination rate too. But they're now well ahead of us, and we have to keep moving to catch up and overtake that. But we had 20% of our population, eligible population, vaccinated before this Delta outbreak. So, yeah, it could have been avoided actually.
If Delta is endemic, we're giving up on elimination at some level. Obviously, there's a bit of a hard choice around Auckland and the rest of the country, because Delta is not endemic outside of Auckland. You've been to Southland over the weekend.
Yeah, no, there's nothing
there.
there.
Down there. We're in Wellington. There's been no cases in a very long time. But and currently it looks to say that way because Auckland's locked away. But is that really sustainable, or will there be a point where we let people from Auckland travel to the rest of the country, and inevitably with that let Delta travel to the South Island?
Well, we'd like to be able to say that if this virus continues to mutate in a stage, because Delta's there now, but it will be mutating to something else. Apparently Mu is the next variant.
Delta's what we've got in New Zealand.
It's what we've got in New Zealand at the moment.
There's not enough Delta in New Zealand that's going to mutate.
No, and we don't, and we should, wherever possible, try and stop that. But that's one of the things it could do, for instance, is to have rapid antigen testing. So if people are worried, as they should be, about Delta moving out of Auckland into Waikato, don't give prisoners the ability to go and take Delta into Waikato. Have rapid antigen testing before people are allowed out of the prison or whatever. That could have been done, and yet, for some unfathomable reason, we're one of the few countries in the world that doesn't allow rapid antigen testing, which could give us a result in 15 minutes.
Would you like to see that used for basically all movement outside of Auckland?
I would have thought that was the sensible thing to do at the moment. Obviously, once we get fewer people with Delta, it is very important that we move past this lockdown. We can't have our country with Auckland in a level 3 or level 4 lockdown forever. The Prime Minister yesterday said, when I asked her, it's costing $750 million a week for Auckland to remain level 4 lockdown. When we were in level 4 lockdown for the whole of the country, that was $1.5 billion. It is not only hard on Auckland, it's hard on the rest of the country.
Obviously, a lot of the criticism you made yesterday was that the time of the golden summer was not used well enough to invest in things like ICU capacity. Mm-hmm. Polling shows, though, that voters overwhelmingly trust Labour more on health than they trust you. If you look at funding over your last term of government and their term, they have put a lot more money into health.
But where have they put it? They put it into bureaucracy. They put it into changing structures rather than actually delivery. What happened to the measles vaccination? Oh, I know, they forgot to order that one and get it rolled out. What's happened to the winter flu vaccination this last year? Late again. They simply are not delivering.
Planning a national COVID response, though, right? David Skegg said just early on in the pandemic, he said, we've hollowed out the Wellington back room, and that's hit. That's one of the reasons we have a good pandemic plan. We have a flu pandemic plan when COVID started. I mean, aren't you talking out of both sides of your mouth here?
No. What is very clear is that a vaccine rollout must include GPs, pharmacists, people out in the community who people trust, people they know. Having been vaccinated, I'm sure you were, one of these big barns that they have set up, perfectly fine, people go through, but there's no privacy. There's no sense of understanding what it is that's going ahead. And you and I are fortunate enough to get a lot of information that a lot of other people won't access. And when we're dealing with things like hesitancy on vaccines, really no country in the world has been successful unless they use primary practitioners in the medical centres. So, look, people under COVID became very frightened, as they still are. And it was very interesting last year to talk about anything else. As soon as COVID came up, people were very fearful. And fear is a very powerful and motivating factor. But we need to move past fear and we need to move to hope. And that hope has to be around life after lockdowns.
Judith Collins, thank you.
Thank you.